We're here with Gary Midkiff. He's a college professor, a lecturer, analyst, writer, author, and chef. He's a jack of all trades. He teaches a business strategy and ethics at North Park University. He works with the Foreign Policy Association's Great Decisions program. He leads community discussions about foreign policy and publishes an international newsletter, The View from My Balcony, which I get in my email inbox. You guys should also covering foreign policy and politics, which is read by an international audience of almost 2,000. His first novel, Busville, has sales ranking in the top 10% of all Amazon fiction titles, and his second novel will be published next year. Gary's a certified chef, and he graduated from culinary school in France. Along with his wife Carol, he looks forward to again hosting dinner parties in their Buffalo Grove home. Gary, before you get started, if you want, you can tell us a little about your novel. That would be cool.
The novel Busville is about the people who drive school buses. Inside that industry, they often tell themselves that they drive the nation's most precious cargo, but bus drivers are often overlooked. And one of the reasons to write the novel was to give people an understanding of what goes on inside that world, which is surprisingly complex. If you read the reviews on the Amazon page, you will see some of the reactions of people who read it and said they had no idea what bus driving was like, and now they have greater appreciation. And that's kind of satisfying because that's one of the reasons to write the novel.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to let Gary take it away here. This is his show, not mine. So, again, please feel free to send a chat, raise your hand if you need me, and we'll get your questions answered.
Okay, we're good. Good evening, everyone. This is my first presentation for the Algonquin Library, and I'm very glad that they invited me to speak with you tonight about a topic that I absolutely love talking about, which has to do with what I call consuming and discussing political news. Now, we just finished an election cycle, so there was kind of a peak of election news, but in fact, a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is applicable any time of the year and is particularly applicable on an interpersonal basis. But let's start with talking about the Midkiff political breakfast. My wife and I have different views on politics, and we will talk more about that in detail. And the only time each day of the week that we know that we will be able to be together is at breakfast. My wife works on a typical office job, 8 to 5 sort of thing, although she's been doing most work at home these days. And my schedule is different every single day. So the one time that we know that we can be together is at breakfast. We subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, the print edition, and it is delivered to our home, and we put it on the table between us, and we read the Wall Street Journal to each other as we eat breakfast. And we disagree as we are reading the Wall Street Journal. That's how our day starts. This is important to some points I'm going to make later on. So we begin with the Wall Street Journal. We consume news from that. We particularly like the editorials. And we consume news from that, and then we go about our day. Now, if I'm going out and driving to a client site, I would probably listen to Morning Edition on NPR, which is WBEZ radio in Chicago. And if Carol were driving into the office versus staying at home and working from home, she would probably listen to WIND AM 560, which is Dan Proft, and Amy Jacobson, which is a conservative talk radio show. In the middle of the day, Carol is probably having lunch with her friends. And if I am out in my car and driving from place to place, I am probably listening to Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager is a conservative talk show host. He also has a YouTube channel, and I enjoy listening to him. He does not yell. I can't do well with Rush Limbaugh, but I can do better listening to Dennis Prager. In the afternoon, if I'm driving around in the afternoon, I will listen to All Things Considered, again on NPR. And if Carol's on the way home, she will listen to the Steve Cortez Show, which again is a conservative talk radio show on her way home. In the evening, assuming that we are not yet together for dinner, Probably Carol will listen to Larry Elder, a conservative talk show host out of Los Angeles. And if I am driving around in the evening, I will do one of two things depending upon my mood. I might listen to Mark Levin for a few minutes, although I can only tolerate Mark for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I have to listen to something else. Or I will listen to really loud rock music in my sports car on the way home. When I get home and Carol's already home, then we sit down and we talk about our day. And the conversation often sounds like, did you hear about this news item? Given today's news, did you hear about William Barr and his statement and how conservative sources are commenting on what William Barr said? What did you hear? What did you hear? How did you interpret it? What did it mean to you? So as you can tell, politics is important to us, and we talk about it on pretty much a daily basis. But if you were counting, you would note that we just used 9 sources of information during the day. And between the two of us, we sourced our information from both conservative and liberal perspectives. One of the messages that I want you to take away from this presentation tonight is the importance of what I call multi-sourcing your news. Multi-sourcing means sourcing from the perspective that you like, as well as from a perspective that perhaps you don't like. That's critically important. When I do presentations in person, people will often walk up to me afterwards and say, well, I read the New York Times, isn't that enough? And my answer is no, it's not enough. But similarly for Carol and me, if our only source of information was the Wall Street Journal, that wouldn't be enough either. If you accept that all media has some degree of bias, and I believe that it does, then the important thing is to identify where the bias is and be sure you're consuming news from a balanced sort of bias. Think of it the way that you think about the food that you consume for your body. You want a balanced diet. You don't want all carbohydrates, you don't want all fruit, you don't want all meat, so you need a balanced diet. And for political news consumption, you also need a balanced diet on the sake of your brain. You need to consume from various places. And I will repeat this to you a couple of times, but multi-sourcing your news is the first thing to think of. If you only rely on one source, even if you enjoy that source a lot, that's not really good for a balanced consumption. All right, so that's what our day looks like. And we balance our consumption between the two of us. And now I'm going to give you an assignment. Now, I give an assignment because I'm a college professor and it's in my nature. But the good news is this assignment is not graded. You don't have to turn in any work. And you are pretty much on the honor system to do what I'm just going to ask you. We are going to create a Likert scale of political beliefs. Likert is spelled Likert. And although you may not recognize the term, you know what it is. The last time that you were online and you were talking to, or you were on the phone and you were talking to a help desk person and they worked through your issue, whatever, and then they would say, would you please take a brief survey? And you say yes. And then they come up with questions to say, was the service you just received exceptional, average, or needs a lot of improvement? And then there will be a numeric value attached to each of these descriptions. And you've got to pick a number. And that becomes feedback for the entity that you called. Well, that scale where there's a number associated with comments is called a Likert scale. So we're going to create a Likert scale. First, I will describe it, and then I will give you the first of 2 assignments that relate to the Likert scale. In your mind, I want you to put a scale in front of you that goes 1 to 7. On the left is the number 1. On the right is the number 7. 4 is in the middle. 1 is going to represent an extreme liberal point of view. 7 is going to represent an extreme conservative point of view, and 4 is going to be kind of a centrist point of view. So construct that in front of you, and let me give you some names of people who fit into these various values. So a Likert scale 1 person who is very, very liberal, I would suggest that Bernie Sanders would fit that description. Now, note, this is neither good nor bad. It's not that Bernie's a good guy or a bad guy. It is that's where he fits with his political beliefs. The sum of his political beliefs is very liberal, progressive, semi-socialist. He is way off to the left, and we're going to call him a Likert scale 1 person for his political perspective. Remember, there's no value judgment here. It's a descriptive placement of where the person goes. A Likert scale 2 is someone who is certainly liberal, but not progressive socialist, but certainly definably liberal. Now, I'm going to suggest that Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, the senator from New York, probably fits a Likert scale 2 profile. Not on every single thing he believes, but if you add them all together, kind of puts him in the 2 spot. All right, Likert scale 3, certainly liberal, left of center, but close to the center, willing to work across the aisle, willing to compromise here and there. I'm going to suggest that Illinois' senior senator, Dick Durbin, probably fits a Likert scale 3 perspective. Likert scale 4, centrist. Me, centrist. I pretty much sit in the middle. I agree with some liberal stuff, I agree with some conservative stuff, and you add them all together, and here I am in the middle. And just so you know, by the way, it's kind of lonely in the middle these days because most people tend to be towards the end of the Likert scale, and there aren't a lot of people here with me, but thus far I'm doing okay. Let's go to the right. Likert scale 5, conservative, but close to the center, willing to work with the center, etc. The candidate for Likert scale 5 is Susan Collins, the senator from Maine. You may have heard in the news in the past few days that there is a House and Senate bipartisan committee working on a proposed stimulus package, a second stimulus package. Susan Collins is one of the 2 leaders of that grouping, and that's not surprising because she works across the aisle and she's used to doing that. How about Likert scale 6? Distinctly conservative. Not ultra conservative, but distinctly conservative. Now, I'm going to suggest Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas. Now, Cruz is certainly a conservative, but if you watch what happened during the past couple of years, on certain pieces of legislation that were important to him, he worked with liberals. He and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is certainly Likert scale 1, worked together on some legislation that was proposed. It didn't make it through the Congress, but the fact that they worked together to me was significant. And a Likert scale 7, a true classic conservative political perspective person would be Mike Pence, the vice president of the US. So now we have 7 people lined up on the Likert scale. I'm in the middle. And the first assignment for you is for you to answer the question, where are you on the Likert scale? Where would you put yourself? There's no wrong answer. You may want to ask your spouse, your friend, your kids, your neighbors, whoever, but there's no wrong answer. But it's really important to know where you are. It's going to be important for some of the tasks that I will give you later in the presentation. And there's not a single question that will give you that answer. It is a combination of questions. I agree with this person here or that person there, and you kind of average them out and you get a feeling for where you are. It is important to know where you are on the Likert scale. So after this presentation is done, you probably are home already, but think about this because that's important to know. I mentioned that I am a centrist. My wife, Carol, politically is about a 6.5 on the Likert scale. So the difference in terms of point value between her and me on the Likert scale is 2.5 points. That is fairly significant, that sort of difference. And we'll talk later about how you work through people of that sort of difference. Now, Carol and I earlier this year celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary. Things are great. Everything is fine. We just have really, really different political perspectives, which also shines light on something else. When I do presentations face to face, people will walk up to me at times and say things like, I can't talk politics with my spouse. I can't talk politics with my children. And I'm always curious about that because to me, the discussion of politics is critically important for we citizens. Politics is the science of how we govern ourselves. Knowing politics, understanding politics, talking about politics is important to be a good citizen. So if I couldn't talk politics with Carol, I would be a little bit challenged to find out who my next best candidate would be. It is how you talk versus the fact that you talk. And near the end of the presentation, we will talk and I'll give you some ideas about how you can work through that. If you have a copy of the presentation online and you downloaded it, you will notice that there are two videos which are listed in the presentation. These days, for whatever reason regarding Zoom, and I don't know why, the videos are not as predictable as they used to be. Sometimes they freeze, sometimes they stutter. It's very frustrating for we presenters. So when it talks about the PBS Idea channel, how does the media tell you what to think? I'm going to talk you through it. I'm going to talk you through the essence of what the presentation is so you understand it, but there's not going to be any video. Sorry, it's just me talking to you. So in that PBS Idea Channel video, does the media tell you what to think? The conclusion is yes, they do. All media tells you what to think, directly, indirectly, aggressively, less aggressively. Media includes advertising in any medium you're watching, as well as newspapers, magazines, TV channels, etc. All media has a bias, and media may not be telling you what to think, but they certainly are trying to persuade you what to how to think, what to think. So it's important. All right. So if we go back to three theories that relate to how the media tells you what to think, the first one was developed really during World War II. And unfortunately, it's called the magic bullet theory, which makes me uncomfortable, but that's what it's called. And the concept is, okay, I've got an idea, I put it into this gun, and I fire it into your head. And when it goes into your head, it makes you think a particular way. The examples that led people to develop this theory had to do with propaganda during World War II. The assumption that if at a movie theater you saw a cartoon that showed Mickey Mouse marching and carrying an American flag with martial music in the background, you would feel a particular way and be motivated to buy war bonds. It turns out that not everyone responds the same way to those sorts of media cues. So although you can say many people will, respond in a certain way to the magic bullet, not everyone responds the same way. So we get into the 50s and into the 60s, and the theory modifies itself, and it becomes known as the two-step flow. The two-step flow says there's information, there is you, and in between the information and you, there is an authority figure, there is an interpreter. So here's the information, the interpreter digests it, and then tells you what the information actually meant. So the two-step means it goes through the authority figure. We had authority figures back in the 60s. They were called Walter Cronkite, Howard K. Smith, Huntley, and Brinkley. They were authority figures. If you go on YouTube and you watch some of their news presentations, they all pretty much had a point of view. They had an agenda of sorts and they wanted to communicate it to you. But the way they were marketed was they're the authority figures. It's time for the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, as if Walter Cronkite is going to speak from Olympus and he's going to tell us exactly what the truth is. Well, he was a journalist. He was, good at his craft, but he wasn't the ultimate source of information. He was, however, an authority figure, and we still get authority figures. If you remember back to the presidential debates, there were, I think, two that actually took place. After the debates between Trump and Biden were over, whatever channel you are watching, they would bring up these talking heads. Here are 6 experts in the studio who are going to tell you what these two people just said and what it means to you. I have difficulty with that. I am a strong believer in what I call first-person consumption of news. To the extent at all possible, I don't want someone to interpret for me. I understand that I read a newspaper and the news reporters are reporting news. But if I'm going to be consuming news, I want to do as much firsthand as I possibly can. Example, a couple of years ago, I read the Robert Mueller report, the whole report, all of it, including the footnotes, which at times seem never ending. Why did I do that? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, I'm a citizen, and I believe that since the Mueller report was going to be important, I should know it firsthand, not let people tell me what's in it. And then secondly, because of what I do professionally, when I would meet people and they would see things like, well, the Mueller report says such and such, and I would say, excuse me, I read the Mueller report. It doesn't say that. Where did you hear that? Oh, well, I was listening to station ABC and the commentator said that's what was in it. And I said, well, the commentator's wrong. Have you looked at that section yourself? And the person then gets embarrassed and goes, well, no, I haven't looked at it myself. Okay, fine. But a first person consumer of news, to the extent that you can be, is much better than listening to talking heads or influencers. It drives me crazy. I want to be a first-hand consumer of news. To me, that is very, very important. The third theory that developed is called uses and gratifications. And this one is actually dangerous. I am not on Facebook. I left Facebook some years ago. We organized my high school's 50th reunion on Facebook, and I got to meet all of the people I'd gone to high school with, and I remembered then why I didn't like most of them. So after we had the 50th reunion, I canceled my Facebook account, and I've not gone back. Carol's on Facebook. She shows me cat videos once in a while because they're entertaining, but Facebook I don't use so much. But on Facebook, if you're familiar with it, you know that you can like someone else's post or video. Wow, I like that. You click on the like button and there's a thumbs up or a waving flag or something that says that you like someone else's post. Well, that person gets the like and goes, wow, look at that. That person liked me. So I'm incented now to like something back that they said. Well, that's not necessarily bad. Presumably, these people are friends of yours, you know where they are, and you like what the other person is saying. Nothing bad about that. But here's the problem with it. You are starting to enter into a place called an echo chamber. And an echo chamber is not a good place to be. An echo chamber is a place where you have fed back to you the opinions you already have. Think of the person who is retired, who sits in front of the TV all day and just watches Fox News and nothing else. Or, based on your political preference, same person, and they spent all day watching CNN because those two channels are pretty far apart. And that's the only source of news that they have. And they watch it because they like it. They tend to agree with what the people are saying. That Sean Hannity is such a nice young man, and he says things I really agree with. Or Don Lemon is such a nice young man, and he says things I agree with. Well, it's okay if you agree with what they say, but if that's all you listen to, you're in the echo chamber where you are fed back the opinions you already have. You need to challenge your opinions, which is why multi-sourcing is important. You don't want to listen to the same opinions all of the time. So you break out of the echo chamber by listening to other sources of news. Back to Facebook for a second. Facebook has huge algorithms. Now, algorithm is just a technical word that simply means a program that captures a lot of data and looks for patterns in it. Those patterns then can be monetized and they can be sold to advertisers. Gary Midkiff spends a lot of time looking at books on Amazon that cover foreign policy. That's part of what I do professionally. So I do a lot of looking at those books in terms of what's new, what did this author write, what are the reviews, should I order that and read it myself, that sort of thing. The fact that I spend time doing that is recorded by an algorithm that says, aha, Gary spends a lot of time looking at these books. So when Gary signs on to Amazon again, Amazon's going to start making suggestions back at me, which goes, wow, Gary, people like you, which is always a dangerous phrase, people like you who like these books have liked these books. Maybe you want to buy those too. In Facebook, what it does is when an algorithm in Facebook defines two people who like each other's posts a lot, they are elevated in terms of contact levels. So when you sign on to Facebook, you're going to find those people first at the top of your feed. because Facebook knows that you're going to tend to like what they say, or they're going to like what you say. So you're going to spend more time on the product. The more time you spend on Facebook, the more ads you're going to be exposed to, which helps them with their monetization of their product. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need to know that it's happening. And it's echo chamber sort of material. I mentioned that I listen to Mark Levin in the evening often when I'm driving, unless I'm listening to rock music. Well, Mark Levin is a Likert scale 7.5, if there was a number like that, but I stop it at 7. And I'm over here in the center and I'm a 4. So a lot of what he says kind of grates on my ears and I go, wow, oh my goodness. But he also interviews really fascinating people that I don't hear anywhere else. And he's a good interviewer, which is defined by ask an open-ended question and shut up. I am frustrated when interviewers ask a question that goes on and on and on, and it's got 6 parts to it and 3 subparts to it. And when they finish the question, you're scratching your head saying, where did this question start? That's not a good interviewer. Levin asks short, direct questions and sits back and says, answer my question. That's a good interviewer. And I enjoy that. But that is understanding and balancing my consumption of news. Keep that in mind, because uses and gratifications, algorithms feeding you what Facebook thinks you're going to want may be entertaining, it might be satisfying, but it's not informative to we citizens. Let me make a comment on that, by the way. I'm a strong believer that being a good citizen in a federal republic, which is what we are governed by, requires a lot of time, requires a lot of effort, requires reading, talking, discussing, etc. It is not a passive activity. I remember a few years ago, I did a presentation at the Barrington Library, which is obviously in an upscale community, and I was talking about a variation of this presentation. And when it was time for a Q&A, a guy in the front row raised his hand and shook his head and said, I'm retired and I don't have time to do all of that reading that you do. That kind of took me by surprise, because I'm working. I mean, I'm working, I'm writing, I'm researching, I'm cooking. And I have time to do this because it's important to me. And he didn't. Well, I don't think that's being a good citizen. It's important to multi-source your news and spend time. First-person consumption of news is preferred. In the outline, if you have it, the next thing talks about my 18 trusted sources. And if you don't have that with you, it's okay, but be sure that you get that from the library to look at later, because this is an important part of the conversation. My 18 trusted sources are those news sources that I refer to on a monthly basis. Now, some of them are 6 days a week, Wall Street Journal. Some of them are daily, which includes some blogs and some websites I go to. Some are weekly, The Economist magazine. Some are bi-weekly, some are monthly. But these 18 sources are sources that I trust, and this is where I consume my news from. It doesn't mean that there aren't other good news sources. For example, The Guardian, newspaper out of Great Britain, is not listed. BBC, British Broadcasting Company, is not listed. Both of them are fine sources, but I can barely get through the 18 that I've got. If I add another one, I'm going to have to take one off, and I really don't prefer to do that. So these are the sources I use. But it's not quite so much that these are sources that you should use. It is, you should perhaps pick from or experiment with these sources, because if you pick one from column A, one from column B sort of thing, then you start to balance your news. Because in my comments on these sources, I talked about what their orientation is, and that becomes important. Let me give you an example. On websites, I have CNN and Fox News listed. And in the comments after them, I say headlines and I avoid their content. During the day while I'm working, every couple of hours, I want to check to see if anything newsworthy happens. So I'll pull up CNN.com, then I'll pull up FoxNews.com, because they view the world very differently, not surprisingly. I'll just scan the headlines, like what's going on. and then I'll close the sites down. I don't typically read what they report because they are so biased, so close-minded that I don't learn much, but I can get some headlines about what's going on. And to me, that's important to do that. So they're handy for that. But other sources I look at because they're balanced or I have to work through them. For example, under the e-newsletter, I have the Interpreter from the New York Times. The Interpreter is a column which I understand is published in the newspaper, and it's also published online. A lady named Amanda Taub is the principal author for the Interpreter. And my comment here says it's inconsistent, sometimes very good, and sometimes just liberal gibberish. So I'm willing to look at it a couple of times a week because sometimes she does really, really good stuff. Another example would be Nicholas Kristof, a New York Times columnist who I subscribe to his e-newsletter because I don't subscribe to the New York Times. And he covers a wide range of topics. He leans to the left. He probably is a Likert scale 2 or so personally. So I keep that in mind when I read his material. But he and I agree on stuff. Recently, he came to the same conclusion that I did, which was keeping schools closed in the face of the pandemic for small children has negative health consequences, which statistically probably overweigh the possibility of them catching COVID-19. Based on my research, I'd come to that conclusion some time ago. So sometimes I agree with them, and sometimes I go, wow, you're just way too far to the left to me. But the important thing is to consume it and to understand it. There is one newspaper listed, the one we subscribe to. So let's go through this. There are 3 quality newspapers in the US. There's the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And if you read one of them, whether it's the e-version or the print version, you read one of them, that's perfectly fine. I don't care which one you read. But read one of them, their reporters are good, and usually their columnists are good. And that's your starting point for balancing your news. The key thing is not just to read one of them. That's not good. You've got to read that, and then you got to branch off into other stuff. And if you're not familiar with some of these sources, then perhaps you want to give them a try and see how it goes. I've had friends of mine who are staunch readers of the New York Times take out a 1-month trial subscription to the Wall Street Journal to see if it matched my description of it. And it's led to some very interesting insights about how they consume the news. So this trusted sources list doesn't mean it's the only sources. It's the ones that I trust. There are others, but as I said, if I've got to add one, I've got to take one off. But the key for you is, can you put together your trusted sources list, whether it's 5 or whether it's 7, whatever the number is? And when you look at it, is it balanced? Are you getting information from the right, information from the left, so you can balance them in your own head? If everything's coming from over here, or everything's coming from over here, that's not to your advantage. It's going to make you a biased consumer of news. That's not a good thing. So the list, in essence, gives you a kind of a guideline or a map about how you avoid that. At the very bottom of my trusted sources list is a statement which always leads to conversation for people who do not know me. Carol and I do not watch TV. Let me try that again. Carol and I do not watch TV. We are in the 11th year of our social experiment of not watching TV. Now, to be fully honest, and I try to be honest as much as I can, so let me raise my hand. To be fully honest, we do watch TV once a year. We watch the Super Bowl. We go next door to the neighbors. They got a really big TV, really great quality. And I cook, watch the Super Bowl there. Other than that, we do not watch TV. Why? First, I don't like to be yelled at when I'm consuming news. I don't want Wolf Blitzer to tell me breaking news after the commercial. Oh, for goodness sake. I am reminded of the statement from David Brinkley many years ago when he said, every night at 5:30, we're going to bring you the news and we're going to convince you that it's important. It's not always important. And yelling at me doesn't do the trick either. So we avoid news. Now, that has other advantages. First of all, we weren't subjected to any of those fair tax advertisements that probably most of you were pounded with before the election in November. Vote fair tax, vote it down, it's unfair, blah, blah. Well, we missed all of that because we don't watch TV. And although I am aware of some TV personalities, I do not watch them because they are there for entertainment value or they are there to make you angry. And it's one of the sad components of the way that news reporting is going these days is the extent to which that news media tries to report news in a way that makes you angry on purpose. Why? Well, if you're angry, you're going to not think as rationally as you would otherwise do, and you will probably stay more involved with the news source. I don't like to be angry. I like to be reflective. I like to be analytical. And I find that watching TV doesn't do that for me. Some people, by the way, that I know have come back to me over the last number of years and said, you know what? My spouse and I have tried your experiment for 6 months. We haven't watched TV. My question then is, well, how's it going? And the usual response I get is, we find that we're calmer. Really? So it may not be for you. What Carol and I do may not fit you or your lifestyle, and that's okay. But it fits us a lot. I have limited amount of time in a week. I'm very busy and my time is precious to me. And if I'm going to consume news, I want to pick a good source, which is informative. And typically that's not going to be on TV. Sometimes people will come to me and say, well, you missed this great Fareed Zakaria show on Sunday. And see, it's because you won't watch TV and you missed his show. The fact is, when someone says to me that there was a show on the other day or 2 days ago, so-and-so is the host, give me about 90 seconds and I will find it on the internet. And if I choose to, I can watch it without commercials, by the way, because I've got YouTube Plus or YouTube Pro, whatever they call it. So I can watch without commercials. People who provide content of news like CNN will make sure that their content's available in multiple formats on your smartphone, on a podcast, on YouTube. And I can find invariably any sort of news program someone tells me that I missed. I know a lot of folks who consume news like I do, so they give me a steady stream of, did you see this? Did you see that sort of thing? And if I choose to, I can watch, but it's not cable news. And that is important to me. The wisdom of Frank Clark, if those of you who don't know me yet, one of my hobbies is collecting quotations. I use them when I speak and I use them when I write. And Frank Clark is the person who said that we find comfort in opinions that agree with us, and we find wisdom in opinions that disagree with us. As you heard from the intro, I write a newsletter, and it's read by a couple thousand people on 5 continents. Thus far, I have no readers in Africa or Antarctica. Probably won't get any in Antarctica. So, and I make political comments and analysis, and I share opinions, and invariably, some number of my readers disagree with me. And it is those people and what they say about why they disagree with me that is much more instructive to me. Someone says, wow, I like what you wrote. Okay, that feels good for a second, and thank you and stuff. But I learn from the people who go, you know what? You didn't really express that very well. And here's why. Okay, that hurts, but I also learn from it because it's a different perspective. And if you go back to that Likert scale I told you about, you need to understand that there are other perspectives that might be able to teach you. I want to talk about discussing politics for a minute, and then I'll go to the second TEDx video about challenging the echo chamber. I mentioned that politics is important to me. It's important to Carol and me, and we talk about it frequently. I am president of the Homeowners Association in the condominium building where I live, which is where I'm talking to you from now. We live on the top floor of a 5-story condominium building in Buffalo Grove. And I know all the residents because I'm the president. I need to know everybody, right? So we have a couple, and their names, first names are Amoy and Jennifer, which is anglicized from what her actual name is. They're from China. And they moved to Canada some years ago, and then they moved to the US. They are in the process of becoming US citizens. They're about 3/4 of the way through, I believe. He was trained as a dentist. She is a electrical engineer. Their oldest son is pre-med at University of Illinois. I believe he is in his senior year now. Their daughter is an honors student going into Stevenson High School. It's a smart family. So as they got to know us and they became comfortable enough to ask us slightly more personal questions, at one point they said to us, "You and Carol talk about politics a lot. Why do you do that?" I said, as I said to you earlier, because politics are important to us. It is the science of how we govern our country. It's important. And their response to me has stuck in my memory. And their response was, in China, we never talk about politics. We assume the government is watching out for us, that the government is doing the right thing, and we never talk about politics, ever. Rest assured that I am never assuming the government is doing the right thing or watching out just for me. And that's cultural, and I understand that. But I'm much more comfortable living in a country where there are perspectives that you can discuss. Freedom of speech is a big thing for me, so that we can discuss that sort of stuff. And living in an environment where you are told, don't worry, the government's watching out for you. It's doing the right thing. You don't have to challenge us or discuss what we're doing because we're looking out for you. Sounds like something out of George Orwell and not a place that I would like to be, or probably they wouldn't like to be there, which is why they left. But they're still adjusting on a cultural basis. I think of their story often. The second video, which I'm not going to show you, is called Challenge the Echo Chamber. And there are a couple of pieces that come out of that video that I find interesting. First of all, studies in both the United Kingdom, which is where the speaker is from, and from the United States indicate that in total, about 2/3 of Americans get their political and news information from their smartphones. They read it on that news feed that goes across the bottom. And for me, that is frightening. Why is it frightening? When I read the Wall Street Journal or you read the New York Times, you know that what you are reading has gone through an editing fact-checking, process. So there's been some time invested in it before you read it. Anybody can post anything that goes across your smartphone, or into Facebook, or into Twitter, or into Parler. There is no editing function. Anybody can say anything. Governor Pritzker won the election for president. Wait a minute. He didn't run for president. No, he did. He won the election for president. Don't you understand that? It's, they stole the election from Pritzker. Really? I wasn't aware of that. Okay. It's unedited news. I want the news I consume to be reviewed, to be edited, to be verified before I read it. And if you read stuff that is the news feed across your smartphone, you may not be necessarily doing that. There's another problem having to do with echo chamber, and that has to do with, as I said before, the way that which you are presented with people or views that you already agree with, which makes it difficult for you to gain other perspectives to validate what it is that you believe. We are better when we consume multiple perspectives. If we don't, we're in danger of falling into an intellectual rut and not really questioning what we hear. All right. So given all of that I just subjected you to, let's move to the stage now where we talk about how you can actually consume and discuss, which is the other part of the title of this presentation, and discuss politics without arguing. Why do people argue about politics? I've got some theories on that, and we'll go into them in a few minutes. But the goal is to discuss politics so that your wife doesn't yell at you or your husband, so that you could sit down at the Thanksgiving table, though recently those were probably kind of small for us, and have a discussion and not have an argument where someone throws a turkey leg at you because they disagree with you. How can you discuss politics and not have arguments? It's important. If we have arguments, we're not really learning from each other. Okay, I mentioned earlier on in the presentation that you needed to put yourself somewhere on the Likert scale, 1 to 7. And if you haven't done that yet, it's okay. But after we're done, you need to do it. The second part of the assignment is to practice with people that you know or people that you just met. Practice figuring out from what they said where they are on the Likert scale, keeping in mind that any position they have is perfectly okay. It's not wrong to be a 1 or a 7, nor is it necessarily correct. It just is. That's where people are. So you need to be able to say in your own mind, where is this other person? Where are they on the scale? Why do you need to practice knowing that? So you can figure out the gap between you. Remember I mentioned I'm a 4 and Carol's a 6.5. So we have a 2.5 point gap between us. Now, obviously, we've practiced going through this, so it's not an issue for us. But if I were to meet Carol in a social situation, I didn't know her, it'd be important for me to get some sort of a gauge or a handle on where she is. It's not going to change my beliefs, but it's going to enable me to talk to her more effectively than otherwise. All right, here is constructive clue number 1. Seek to understand rather than persuade. Seek to understand rather than persuade. If you enter a discussion which has a political content to it, and you enter it with the intention that you are going to persuade this other person how right you are and how wrong they are, pretty much I can guarantee you where this conversation is going to go, and it's not going to be terribly pleasant. You need to focus on understanding the other person. How did they reach that conclusion? What source did they use? What life experience, what job do they do that might lead them to that? What college did they graduate from? Any number of things to explain to you how they reach their opinion. Their opinion is valid for them. You do not have the right to try to change it, and they probably haven't asked you to anyway. But if you're going to have a conversation with them, you need to at least understand it. And to understand, you've got to seek to understand rather than to persuade. The key to this, seeking to understand rather than persuade, is the art of listening. Most people do not know how to listen. Most people, when listening in a broad sense to someone else, aren't really listening. What they are doing is forming their response while the other person is talking, so that when this person stops talking, they can fire back their response right away to show how mentally adept and nimble they are. They aren't listening. They're constructing arguments inside their head. When I work with my undergraduates, who, as you may probably understand, I confuse on a regular basis, I will sometimes say to them in a face-to-face situation, I will say to them, what is the sound of listening? And they'll look at me with blank faces and go, what are you talking about? And I said, no, it's a serious question. What is the sound of listening? And they fumble and they stumble and they go in circles for a few minutes. And when we're done with that part of it, I say to them, okay, the sound of listening is the sound of a sponge absorbing water. Listening is the sound of a sponge absorbing water. First response from them is, doesn't make any sound, to which I said, you're correct, it doesn't. If you are listening to someone, really listening to them, there's no sound in your head. You are not constructing your response. You're not constructing an argument. You are totally focused on what they are saying. You are absorbing it. You are seeking to understand it. Our brains are really quick. And when that other person stops talking, you'll come up with a response in a few nanoseconds. Not going to be embarrassing. You don't need to do it while they're talking. You need to listen to them. A few months ago, I had an outdoor lunch with a friend of mine that I hadn't seen face to face in, 7 months or something at the time. And we decided it was time to meet face to face. So we had little outdoor lunches. And my friend was struggling with a decision. He's single. He's in his mid-60s. He lives by himself in Libertyville. He was thinking of moving to Virginia to be closer to family. He's from Bangladesh, and in that culture, family is very, very important. And for some reason, he had a lot of family in Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. So he's thinking about leaving Libertyville and moving there. This is an important thing for him to figure out. He's lived in this area for 30 years. So he's telling me about his issue and pros and cons and what his thoughts were. I'm totally focused. I am listening to every word he says because I'm kind of thinking he's going to ask for an opinion at some point. And at some point while he's talking, he stops and he backs up and he goes, "Gary, you're staring at me." To which I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Yeah, you are." And I thought for a second, I said, "Oh, I'm not staring. I'm just intently listening to you. I want to be sure that I have absorbed everything that you're saying because I expect you're going to ask me for an opinion later. And I want to absorb everything you said." Well, my friend said, "Okay," and continued his conversation. By the way, he is in Virginia now on kind of a test basis. He rented a house there and he's staying there for 4 months, I think it is, to see what it's like living in that part of the country near his family. And then next spring or summer, he'll make a decision. That's what he decided to do. But I was struck by that because to me, it was a bit of a compliment, which is I knew that I was really listening. He had my full attention because he does, which is why I'm often bothered when I see people pretending to have a conversation while they look at their cell phone. My cell phone is right here. And, I'm really listening to you. Yes, really, that's really interesting. And you're looking at their phone. They're not listening to you at all. They're watching their phone or reading their phone or whatever they're doing on their phone. Listening is an art, requires your full attention. And if you're going to understand someone else, you've got to listen to them as opposed to trying to persuade them. Trying to persuade them, conversation will not have a good outcome. Pretty much can guarantee that. Number two, seek to learn rather than win. Seek to learn rather than win. There is no winning in a political conversation. It doesn't happen in a political conversation. However, it is an opportunity to learn. I'll be talking to someone and they'll make a statement that I'm 99% sure is fake news. But I don't say, "You idiot, that's fake news," because that's not going to go well. So the way I phrase it is, "Wow, that's really interesting. I don't think I'd heard that. What source did you hear that from? Because I'd like to check that source because I was totally unaware of what you just said." And if the person says something like, "Well, I heard it from Alec Jones on InfoWars." Okay, I've got some insight to where this person gets information from. And now I can kind of aim the conversation to maybe talk about that as a valid or an invalid source. If the person says, "Well, I read it in Tom Friedman in the New York Times," then I can say, because Friedman is a well-respected journalist, and I'll say, "Oh, do you read Tom Friedman regularly?" "I read him every day, and I think I agree with everything he says." Okay, so we may have someone in an echo chamber here. Actually, I don't think Friedman writes every day, however many times per week he writes. I think we have someone in an echo chamber because that's the person they read. They read that person regularly, and that's the person they always agree with. One of my favorite columnists in the Wall Street Journal is a man named Jason Riley, who's also on their editorial board. And Riley has very strong opinions on things. And sometimes I agree with them and sometimes I don't. Carol tends to agree with him because he's a little bit over there on the Likert scale. But sometimes I agree and sometimes I don't. But to me, that is a good thing, because when I disagree, since I know he's well researched and has thought through his columns, it makes me think or go research or cross check, because maybe I need some more information. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So seek to learn rather than win. I never try to win a political conversation. People might say to me, "You're knowledgeable," and I say thank you because it's what I do professionally. So I may be knowledgeable, but I'm still not trying to win conversations. There's no, all it does is make the other person angry. Third one, and this is the one that you can practice. And some people say that this is doesn't work for them, and I suggest they keep trying. The phrase that I use sounds like this: seek common ground and spend time plowing it. Seek common ground and spend time plowing it. I meet someone at a party. You all remember what parties are like, right? Large groups of people get together without masks and talk. You remember what that's like. So I'm at a party, hypothetical in this case, and I'm introduced to someone I don't know. I know nothing about them, but I like to talk to them. My interest is going to be politics. I mean, I can always drop back to, how about them Bears, but that doesn't interest me so much. So let's talk politics. And I need to get some idea of where they are on the Likert scale. So I will ask an open-ended question. An example today might be that I understand that President-elect Biden is considering suggesting to the Congress that there be a massive waiver of student loan debt, that a lot of it simply gets waived so students don't have to repay it back. What do you think about that? You thought about that? I didn't express my opinion. I shared a fact. President-elect Biden is thinking about this, which is true. And I said, it interests me. Do you have an opinion? And a couple of things happen if the person is willing to engage in this conversation. And sometimes people will not, by the way. They don't want to talk politics, or their mind is made up, or whatever it might be. Let's assume this person is conversational. And they will say, actually, I've thought about that a lot, and here's my opinion. A, B, C, D, E. Okay. What they tell me about the waiving student loan debt is going to start me on the process of placing them on the Likert scale. And please remember, there's nothing wrong with what the numerical equivalent is. It is a way to place a person to be able to communicate better with them. If I am talking to a Likert scale 1, I need to talk in different terms and in different ways than if I'm talking to a Likert scale 7. My values aren't going to change. I'm not a chameleon, but it will help me to know where they are. So, looking for common ground. This person gives me a couple of minutes of their opinions about this topic. And as I'm listening to them, I know that their views and mine are pretty far apart. Oh boy, we're not close on this one at all. That's fine. But I'm listening, remember? And I'm listening to what they're saying. And what I'm doing is, because I already know that we're pretty far apart, what I'm doing is I'm looking for something they say that I can agree with. But I've got to be honest. I can't do this like it's a stage acting. I'll give you an example. Let's assume that the person believes that waiving student debt is a terrible, terrible idea. And let's assume that waiving student debt, large amounts of it, to me has some attractive points to it. So I may be Likert scale 2.5 on this one. He's maybe Likert scale 6.5 on this one. So I got a bit of a gap. But he says, one of the reasons it bothers me is that it's going to affect the national debt, and our national debt is way too big, and this is just another way that the debt's going to get larger. And I can interrupt or interject more appropriately and say, you know what? I agree with you. I'm concerned about that too. The federal debt is in fact important to me, not to everyone, obviously, but it's important to me. And that concerns me too, about what the impact might be. Now, I have to be sincere and I've got to be honest. But if I let the person talk for a minute or so, the probability is they're going to say something I can agree with, and I need to interject and say, you know what, I agree with you. What does that accomplish psychologically? Person doesn't know me any better than I know them, but I just said something that says I agree with you. We now have a point of connection. And the way that I phrase it, seek common ground and spend time plowing it. I just found common ground with that person. It's only a teeny little piece. That's okay. It's only a teeny piece, but it's a piece. And it gives me the ability maybe to expand it, to plow that ground and see what else that might be there. And then we can talk a bit further. The person hearing me agree with them can kind of let their guard down a bit. Okay, this is not some, left-wing kook or right-wing kook is just going to yell at me. This person's listening and we have a point of agreement. So down come the defenses a bit. And now we can talk a bit. Because to me, conversation with other people, as you can probably determine, I'm an extrovert, so conversing with other people is a big part of my day, is a good thing. It's a helpful thing, and it helps me understand people. I'm not trying to persuade this person of anything. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to establish commonality, and then we might be able to have better and longer conversations in the future. Where are you on the Likert scale? Where are other people on the Likert scale? And follow those 3 points that I just walked you through. And if you do all of that, you will find out that there will be less arguing and more discussing. There's nothing which is more frustrating and pointless than an argument about politics. If you want to argue, okay, how about I may get the year wrong, but I think I've got it right. Are the 2005 White Sox a better team than the 2016 Cubs? They both won the World Series. Who's the better team? Okay. If you're a sports fan, you can probably argue that one for hours and have a great time. But politics is different than sports. Sports is entertainment. Sports isn't how we govern ourselves. So when we're talking politics, we need to have a different point of view, which includes the Likert scale, listening, the sound of a sponge absorbing water, and talking in a way which doesn't try to persuade, doesn't try to win, and tries to find common ground with another person. If you do all of those things, and yes, it takes an investment of time and an investment of energy. Yes, it does. And I would be untruthful to you if I said this was easy. And have I been doing this for a long time? Yes, I have. So it may be uncomfortable for you. It may not be successful at times, but by golly, it's going to work for you. And you will find that you can discuss politics without arguing. Keep in mind that this will not work with everyone. There are some people who do not want to discuss. They just want to repeat their beliefs. And if you don't agree with them, then, go jump in a lake because they don't want to talk to you. And sometimes I bump into people like that. I've had people just walk away from me in conversation. I didn't say anything wrong. I just indicated that I was open-minded and they were looking for someone who was equally close-minded to them. So it's not perfect, but it works a lot and it works well. We sometimes have had, because we haven't had a real dinner party in a while, but we sometimes have dinner parties where I will invite over people that I know are conservatives. It makes Carol happy because, that's where she is. But I can talk with them easily and comfortably because I'm seeking to understand their positions, not to argue with them. I don't invite people over to my house to argue. I invite them over to have a good time. So I can do that, or I can invite liberals, or I can invite, a mixture of people, and I can talk to all of them because that's what I can do. If you practice what I've been talking about this evening, you can do that too. And trust me, it's a whole lot more satisfying to talk to someone rather than argue with them and then walk away and go, well, that was a waste of 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it was. I don't like to waste time. Time's precious to me. So if I'm going to talk to someone about an important topic, I want to do it with an open mind where I'm respectful and we can exchange ideas. That is my presentation on consuming and discussing political news. And I'm going to go look in the chat box now to see if there is something there that I should respond to. Give me just a minute. I will pull open the chat box here. Let's see. Okay, we're talking about mics and emails. We've already covered all of that. So I think we're good on those. Kate, I do not see any questions for me to answer.
Me neither. So if you guys have any questions, now would be a great time to share them. Thank you, Gary, very much for being with us today. It's very
You're
nice
welcome.
good there.
By the way, for those of you who have not seen my guest bedroom, which is where I am now, that conversation about the Cubs and the Sox, it's easy. The Cubs are the better team. This, as Kate already knows, I'm pointing to it, is the front page of the Tribune the day after the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. And they were the better team. I just thought you'd like to know that in case you hadn't thought through that recently. Okay.
Well,
One final comment. When you look at the handout, on the front of the handout is my email address. And if you are interested in receiving a couple of test copies of that newsletter I was talking about, The View from My Balcony, just send me an email, say that you were in the audience tonight and you would like to get a couple of test copies, and I will be happy to send a few to you and see what you think. Okay, very good. That's it, Kate.
awesome. Thank you very much again. Thank you guys for attending. If you think of questions hereafter that you just couldn't come up with right away, feel free to send them to me, and I can get them on to Gary, or take a look through your handout. If you didn't get that, again, let me know and I'll send it to you. This will be available on the library's YouTube page in a few days, so you guys can review it as needed. And thank you very
Very good.
much. Have a great night.
Okay, good night, everybody.